We need to have a conversation about Pokemon DLC. You see, Game Freak had to adapt to the times, so they opted to continue the DLC trend with Scarlet and Violet. But was it really worth it? Was there anything lost in the transition to this model? Well, we're gonna figure that out today, and definitely not take way too long to answer it. Just like always.
Don't you just love modern gaming? I mean, am I alone here? Anybody else like paying more for games while the employees get treated worse? All while still somehow going through the slowest gaming crash in history? And by my estimation, all the big gaming companies are doing just great right now. I mean, if it's good enough for Ubisoft, then it's good enough for the creators of Cherubi.
Just barely!
Game Freak has never really been the kind of company to rethink their release schedule. I mean, they went the first 23 years of Pokemon's lifetime with the exact same business model, with only slight variations. It's a grift as old as time. Well, older than my time. You launch two versions of the same game at the same time, with only minute differences between the two. You get the Rubes to pick allegiances like it's the goddamn election, and even bigger Rubes to get both versions to prove how big of a fan they are, and I promise this isn't a result of unexplored trauma, and yes, I took my medication today! Then, a few years later, you make a third version, marketed as being the definitive version, even though sometimes it's not, and get everyone to buy it again.
Sounds great. I only have one suggestion though. What if we made it shittier?
You see, these days we live in the age of the ongoing game. With the technology to keep games up and going through regular updates, DLCs, and events, there's no need to put out a completely different product on store shelves. You could just support the game forever.
This has almost nothing to do with what we're about to talk about.
But it does set the stage for the gaming climate we're currently in. Clearly, Game Freak's old model was more than a bit outdated. They knew that they probably couldn't get away with releasing a third version of a game on a console with such quick and readily available internet access and storage. There had to be some kind of switch up to the way they upgraded these games. And in 2020, this is exactly what they did with Pokemon Sword and Shield. Instead of the fabled Pokemon Draw and Quarter or whatever, they released an expansion pass for the two games, allowing customers to expand their games with two new stories containing new regions, Pokemon, and gameplay improvements, all for $30. Now, in theory, this is nothing but a positive thing for both the game and the consumer. The game is able to be expanded with new and exciting content, and the consumer doesn't have to spend a whole other $60, plus not being able to transfer their save data over. However, what if I told you that the DLC model for Pokemon is not exactly a perfect solution?
Stockholm Syndrome is a bitch.
Yes, ever since the release of Gen 8's expansion pass, there's been a somewhat sizable discourse if DLC is the right fit for Pokemon, rather than the traditional third release. Now, while I'm not one to bring up every little argument the Pokemon community has, you couldn't pay me to have an opinion about shiny locking, I do think this is an interesting discussion to have, because there are legitimate things that have been lost in the transition to the DLC model. So, let's get into it. The main argument for the third release is that they traditionally fixed more major and structural issues the original two versions had. Things that would be very difficult to just patch in. Take Pokemon Crystal for example. That version of Gen 2 added more puzzles, subplots, and overall layout changes that benefited from being a completely different version of the game separate from the original release. Emerald switched up some of the gyms, Platinum added entire new areas and completely changed up the game speed. Hell, Ultra Sun and Moon changed so much about the base game and its plot that it's almost a completely different game. Most of these changes were a lot deeper than just new content in Pokemon. They gave Game Freak the chance to rebuild a game from the ground up, instead of patching up a rocky framework. And let me tell you, there hasn't been a rockier framework in the entire series than Scarlet and Violet. If there was ever a Pokemon game that needed a complete redo, it was this one. But for the sake of fairness, let's take a look at just how Game Freak updated Scarlet and Violet over the course of its lifetime, outside the content added in the DLC. So, let's see all the amazing tweaks and additions added in this living, breathing game? Well, first, they did in fact optimize something related to the boxes and how fast they loaded. When the game launched, for some reason the boxes would take a million years to load up the Pokemon sprites. So you had to sit there for a little bit before you can even do anything with them. But with update 1.2, they fixed this problem so the boxes loaded a lot faster. And as an added bonus, they added a ton of extra functionality to them. So, credit where credit is due, Game Freak did in fact fix a performance related problem in this one specific instance. Now, let's see what else. Oh, they updated the in-game camera to have a bunch more options when it comes to how you can position it and your Pokemon. Though it is still a clunky implementation of a photo mode, I wish they could just have it be a traditional free control photo mode rather than just having it be handheld. The farthest you could zoom out is still way too tight, and it's basically impossible to get a shot of you with your entire team. Then they fixed some bugs, did a bunch of terror raid events and mystery gifts, and that's it.
Don't do shit. It's genius. I'm starting to realize I do a lot of bits where I write stuff down.
Yes, over the course of Scarlet and Violet's 10 patches, there were not any fixes to the way the game looks or runs, or any other of the major problems with the game for that matter. Despite them putting out a weird, and in retrospect, damage controlling statement promising that they were going to look into it. And I promise, I looked extensively through each of these patch notes. There were virtually no other major fixes or quality of life features added. Unless you want an extended bit covering TM sorting, there's nothing else to discuss on the S&V patch front. The patches for Scarlet and Violet don't really make the best case for DLC in Pokemon, and that maybe the game could have benefited from a more extensive upgrade. From watching some deep dives on how S&V works under the hood, it's widely agreed that the performance problems stem more from fundamental flaws in the way the engine was built. So it's not necessarily something that could be fixed or optimized in a patch. A third version could, theoretically, allow Game Freak to fix some deep-seated problems with the way the game was built. But I'm not so sure that's how it would go down. Let me ask you, when has Game Freak ever done something like that in the third release? Sure, they've redesigned things in terms of game pace and overall structure in third versions before, but never anything as drastic as changing how the engine works. They did make Platinum a quote-unquote faster game overall compared to Diamond and Pearl, but that had more to do with the battle speed and making the character faster while surfing, not really in terms of performance or anything. As much as I love their games, Game Freak is one of the most frugal in terms of how they spend development resources, and it's always been that way. And I don't think they would have spent a whole lot of dev time making the game run better in a theoretical Pokemon Chartreuse or whatever. So I'm not exactly convinced that all, or even most of Scarlet and Violet's shortcomings would be fixed if they took a year to put out a new version. Also, let's be honest, the third version has always been a huge ripoff. Hey, you know that game you bought a couple years ago? Well, we just released a new version that completely makes the old one obsolete and improves it on every single aspect.
Oh wow! Can I upgrade my existing copy to the new one? Or at least carry over my save data?
Nope. $40 please. Also, your wife is leaving you.
Finally some good news. I'll take 4.
So let's pretend Game Freak did in fact make a new version of this game. Do you really think people would be happy with this announcement? People would have been way more upset if they had to spend a whole other $60 again just to play the not fucked up version of a game they basically beta tested. And I think Game Freak knew this all the way back in 2019 when they put out Sword and Shield. With the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra, Game Freak was finally able to let go of this outdated pricing model while still being able to expand the game for half the price. But on the other hand, I always thought this expansion was mid as hell. Yeah, I never cared for either of Gen 8's DLCs to be honest. I feel like I always hear how the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra fixed Sword and Shield and massively improved them, but I don't know, man, they never really moved me. The thing I did like about them was the fact that both of the areas in each region were just wild areas, compared to most of Sword and Shield with its generic ass towns. I loved exploring both of these maps, just wandering around catching Pokemon and vibing, something I would later enjoy about Scarlet and Violet. And in retrospect, it's obvious that they were using this DLC as a testbed for the next generation. You know, whether or not the Pokemon formula could work in a completely open setting. But much like the base game, That's all I see it as now. A test for something way more interesting that would come later. Because in terms of the stories, characters, and what you're trying to accomplish in these DLCs, it's just one big blank for me. Mustard was a cool character, and I kinda like the Reggie stuff in the Crown Tundra, but trying to get me to recall almost anything from these DLCs is like trying to have me remember what I had for lunch exactly 2 years ago. It was something I consumed, it was fine I guess, and I moved on with my life. So these are both imperfect solutions as far as I'm concerned. In a perfect world, I think it would be great if we could get improvements to the base game in patches along with DLC. But that's probably not happening. Whatever base versions of Gen 9, 10, and beyond is most likely going to have the same core problems for its entire lifetime. So let's assume for the foreseeable future, all Pokemon games will be going off the current expansion pass model, with 2 story expansions coming out post-release. What's the theoretical best case scenario? I feel like ideally, you would want a DLC expansion to stand out on its own, but not too much. These expansions would need to add some kind of improvements that fed back into the base game as well. So, I've built a 3-tiered rubric on which Scarlet and Violet's expansion, as well as any future DLCs, will be judged by. 1. Does the expansion add substantial improvements to the base game? This would include things like adding back past Pokemon into the National Dex and miscellaneous new features such as the item duplicator or ultra wormholes, as well as any optimization to the way the game runs in SNV's case. 2. Do the world, characters, and mechanics featured feel distinct enough to justify a separate story expansion? Basically, does the new region you can explore in the DLC feel unique compared to the base game, or does it feel like a retread of the same environments? And does the expansion have distinct characters and an original plot that holds as its own story? And 3, is the DLC long or big enough to stand alone as its own piece of content? This one's pretty straightforward. Is it enough bang for your buck? So, now that we've set the parameters, let's see what we're working with here. Scarlet and Violet's expansion pass, like Gen 8's, contains 2 separate story expansions. The Teal Mask, set in the land of Kitakami and focused around the Pokemon Ogerpon, and the Indigo Disk, which takes place back in Unova at Blueberry Academy, and is set at $35, $5 more than Gen 8's DLC. Oh, the next Pokemon game is totally going to be $70, isn't it? Released September 13th, 2023, it's part 1 of the Pokemon TM, Scarlet and Violet's The Hidden Treasure of Area Zero Expansion Pass, the Teal Mask.
Game Freak really needs to get more creative with their titles. I mean, anybody would have guessed that would be the name.
Too Long Didn't Read takes place in the Japanese-inspired land of Kitakami on a school field trip, where the player finds themselves discovering the shocking truth behind the region's mythology. But before we get into the specifics on what Kitakami has to offer on its own, let's cover and grade the small improvements the Teal Mask added to the base game. Emphasis on small. Alright, first and foremost, much like all the other expansions to date, many legacy Pokemon were added back to the National Dex of the base game via a patch. 102 Pokemon to be exact, which is honestly a pretty impressive number. Looking through the list, I do like how many of the older regional forms were added back into the game, and I'm pretty shocked to see how some other mons were originally omitted from the original release. Like, what do you mean Snorlax wasn't in this game already? Well, no wonder Vince Staples is yet to give his official statement on Gen 9.
Hello world, it's Vince Staples here along with Snorlax.
Alright, let's see, oh, there were quite a bit of cosmetics and hairstyles added. That's cool, I guess. At the very least, the Jinbei, not that one, outfit you unlock during the story allows your character to not look like a European school student for once. And, Rotom phone cases. Come on, there's gotta be something else in here. They added a slightly different type of mass outbreak that are online event based and have even higher shiny odds. To be fair, these events are one of the only reasons I still boot this game up every once in a while. So that's not nothing, but I'm really scratching the bottom of the barrel here. Balance changes? As much as I would love to dedicate an entire 30-minute section to how Shifttree's second ability is now Wind Rider instead of Early Bird, I think I'm gonna call it there in terms of stuff I can reasonably call improvements to the base game. And yeah, it's not much. As I mentioned earlier, there's literally no optimization to the way the game runs. And Kitakami runs just as, if not worse than the base game, despite it being a smaller map. I think it may have something to do with the extra foliage, but what do I know? So I can pretty confidently say that the Teal Mask gets a C- for this section. I really had to scrape to find positive overall changes this expansion brought to the game. The returning Pokemon and the few new cosmetic options saved this from getting a failing grade in this department. But the base game isn't what we're here for, right? We want to explore a new region, meet new characters, and have completely new experiences we couldn't in the original release. So let's see what the Teal Mask has to offer as its own experience. You find your way to the new region by way of school trip, guided by new character Briar, who's a teacher at Unova's Blueberry Academy, as well as a descendant of one of the initial Area Zero researchers, and is trying to clear their name after the team's original findings were discredited. She guides the class to Kitakami, a mountainous, landlocked foreign region somewhere in the Pokemon world. Okay, I'm not usually the one to harp on continuity in these games, but does anybody else find it weird that we don't know exactly where this region is, or at least where its closest neighbor is? I only bring this up because the region in the next expansion makes it very clear where it takes place, and it's cooler because of it. They really couldn't have just said that Kitakami was the border region to Johto or Sinnoh or something. Anyways, it's here where you become acquainted with Kieran and Carmine, two siblings at Blueberry Academy, and locals to the small town of Masui. And Carmine, not taking well to outsiders, immediately challenges you to a Pokemon battle.
Xenophobia in my Pokemon game? Yeah, honestly, that's to be expected.
Carmine in these early portions of this DLC doesn't really do herself many favors, because she's also very verbally abusive to and controlling of her timid younger brother. She basically strong arms Kieran to team up with you for the first leg of the trip, which involves students going around and learning about Kitakami's history through these signboards scattered throughout significant locations in the region. It's here at the initial two signboards where you learn about the local tale of the Loyal Three, which involves a trio of heroic legendary Pokemon who sacrifice their lives defending Kitakami from a vicious ogre. Kieran, however, makes it pretty clear that he's a fan of the ogre and doesn't think it's the monster people make it out to be. It's not too long after this where you and Carmine run into the real ogre the myths tell about, a Pokemon named Ogerpon who wears masks to blend in and hide from people. But it's far from the ferocious monster that had been fabled. She's actually quite timid and afraid to approach humans, as she runs off and drops one of her masks in the process. After this encounter, the siblings' grandfather tells the real story of Ogerpon. As it turns out, the Loyal Three were evil Pokemon who came to Kitakami to cause havoc, and Ogerpon only killed them out of retaliation after they stole her masks and destroyed her home. So the villagers interpreting Ogerpon as a monster killing their guardians was a huge misunderstanding. Of course, Carmine is not exactly stoked after finding out that her hometown had been worshipping the Antichrist times 3 this entire time, but the grandfather tells both of you to keep it a secret for now, as anyone who speaks out against the Loyal Three are labeled as heretics. In the meantime, he promises to finally fix the lost fourth mask of Ogerpon, the Teal Mask.
Oh.
And it's probably here where I should talk about the structure of this DLC. Much like Paldea, Kitakami is a completely open map, where no matter your place in the story, you can explore any area freely. But as an open world, Kitakami is kinda disappointing. First off, most of the map is taken up by this massive mountain in the center. And while that's a bit of a unique thing to center the world around, it makes it seem really small. And there's not a ton of variety in the mountain region itself to make up for it. While I can understand and respect their attempt to make an open map with a real sense of verticality, it just ends up feeling extremely claustrophobic. Kitakami also has a bit of a structure problem compared to Paldea. Unlike the base game where you have the freedom to choose which order you tackle the objectives in, the Teal Mask has a very A to B to C structure to it. There's a few times where you're given a couple choices where to go, but for the most part it is very linear. I never felt like I was truly exploring Kitakami. I was just going from objective to objective. It's not bad by any means. At its core, it's still the same basic loop I enjoy from the base game, but it's most definitely a step down for me. Going back to the story, our objectives seem pretty straightforward so far. Fix Ogerpon's mask to get its trust, and tell the villagers the truth behind the myth. But it wouldn't be a story without some little shit making conflict happen, so of course Kieran had been eavesdropping on your conversation earlier. And, enraged, he steals the Teal Mask and challenges you to a battle for it. He feels just as othered and outcasted by everyone as Ogerpon, and resents you and Carmine for keeping this secret from him. After you beat him, he punches the monument dedicated to the Loyal Three out of frustration and runs away. Just before a huge fucking blast of energy comes out of the monument, and the Loyal Three are resurrected and ready to cause mayhem again. And to make things worse, they immediately run off and steal the remaining 3 masks, which powers them up massively. So you clean up the mess Kieran caused by tracking each of these 3 fucks down and taking the mask back. God, Kieran is such a frustrating character in this DLC. Let's blow off some steam by discussing some of the unique side content the Teal Mask has to offer. Well, first, there's Ogre Ousting, a fun little score-based minigame where you ride Koraidon. It's a cute little distraction, and to make it better, you get a shiny Munchlax as a final reward after beating the hardest difficulty. I always love when they give us fun, unique ways of obtaining rare Pokemon. There's also a group of ultra hard NPCs called the Ogre Clan spread all across the map. They have VGC level AI and are pretty fun to fight. And might as well talk about the few new Pokemon that were added here. Diplin, which is a cool divergent evolution of Applin, but it's a bit unnecessary. Especially since they staggered the release of this evolution line by putting the second evolution in the next DLC. Most people spent months with this thing in their boxes, wondering if Game Freak was ever going to do something with it. Then there's Poltergeist and Sinistra. I'm a big fan of the possessed object kind of Pokemon, so this line really works for me. It's a really cool use of a divergent evolution. Then there's the Loyal Three themselves, Okidoki, Munkidori, and Fizandipity. I don't know, man. This has got to be one of the lamest legendary trios of all time. Especially since Scarlet and Violet already has a great group of legendaries. Get these frauds out of here. I'm glad Kieran revived these fucks so I could personally send them back to hell where they belong. Then finally, there's Ogerpon, which is one of the only legendaries I've had on my team in my entire time playing Pokemon. Usually I treat the legendaries as trophies that will rot in my boxes well after I perish from this world, but something about Ogerpon's design and her mask system made me want to use her for my DLC playthrough, and I did not regret it. She is super fun to play around with in double battles specifically. I loved switching up her masks to fit my current situation. And coming to our final stop in terms of side content, we arrive at the Teal Mask's sole side quest, Timeless Woods. And boy, this is a good one. So, this side quest involves a new character named Perrin, a photographer who is visiting Kitakami to document a mysterious Pokemon known as the Blood Moon Beast. Her character, and this entire subquest for that matter, is a huge send-up to Legends Arceus. She's from Sinnoh, uses a Hisui and Growlithe as her partner Pokemon, and is very clearly a descendant of Adaman from that game. After you catch 150 Pokemon in the Kitakami Pokedex, she deems you worthy to come along with her to the Timeless Woods, which is where the Blood Moon Beast, a rumored special variant of Ursaluna, is located. The Ursaluna reportedly only comes out at night when it's foggy, so you wait until dusk. And in the meantime, Perrin has you photograph other Pokemon in the area, Pokemon Snap style. I swear to God, this is the only section in the entire game that makes use of both the camera and the sneaking feature. I honestly wouldn't mind if this was a recurring mission type in future games. There's something inherently cool about seeing Pokemon in their natural habitats, and the fact that a core series game explores this is awesome. It's not too long after where the actual beast makes an appearance, Blood Moon Ursaluna, which is one of the best variants of a Pokemon I've ever seen. I thought the original Ursaluna was fine, but this form is frankly stunning in terms of its design. Its scarred face and bipedal stature makes it so imposing and cool looking. It damn near wiped out my entire team, and I only clutched it out thanks to the GOAT Mellow. I love this yellow frog, man. One of my favorite team members I've ever had. Anyways, after you beat and capture Blood Moon Ursaluna, you meet back with Perrin in town, whose photos of Ursaluna came out blurred and effectively useless. Regardless, she states that she's once again found her passion for photography and thanks you for your help, and leaves you with a Hisuian Growlithe of your own. That quest was one of my favorite sections in any Pokemon game to date. My only criticism is that there are not more things like this in Scarlet and Violet. You get to hang around a cool new character while learning about a unique wrinkle of the Pokemon world, and you get a bitching new form of a Pokemon at the end. Game Freak absolutely needs to keep this same energy with side quest design in the future. Well, that was a nice detour. Where were we in the story? Oh god, that's right. When you return to town, you find out Kieran had convinced the townspeople of Ogerpon's innocence, which is extremely convenient. Either these people are extremely swayable and or gullible, or Kieran is this master James Baldwin-esque public speaker. And one of those options is more likely than the other. Does this child look like he could write Go Tell It on the Mountain? Anyway, with the disloyal, dismembered three back in the dirt where they belong, the only thing left is to bring Ogerpon back to her home. However, it seems like Ogerpon would rather stay with you, as you're the one that helped it clear its name. But since Kieran's there, he can't let a good thing happen without throwing a fit for no reason, as he thinks that she should be his partner. So he batters you for her. After you easily beat him and give him a wedgie, he laments how weak he is, and proceeds to run off to his room. And that's pretty much the story of the Teal Mask. And it's fine. Ogerpon kind of saves it for me, as I really like her. As I made pretty clear, I didn't care much for Carmine, and especially Kieran, in part 1 of this DLC. Carmine, I'm a little more forgiving toward, because I don't think you're supposed to like her in the way she treats people at first, as she eventually comes around and has a bit of a redemption arc towards the end. But Kieran, oh boy. Despite being the one you're supposed to sympathize with, he just comes off as really unlikable and grating. Like, you want to be on his side since he's pretty transparently a victim, but it's really hard when he just starts causing problems for no reason.
At least we'll never see him again, am I right? Hey, what's part 2 about?
Judging whether or not the Teal Mask sets itself apart from the base game is tough for me, because it absolutely does, just not always in a super positive way. The story objectives are very dissimilar from Paldea's, but it's because they're super linear and boring. These are in fact different characters, but there's only like 4 of them, and the main 2 you're interacting with aren't really that likable. Kitakami is a distinct region from Paldea, in that it's super claustrophobic and doesn't have a ton of different biomes. But there are some things I do think really work here. Like I mentioned, Perrin's side quest is amazing and should absolutely set the tone for side quests in all future Pokemon games. Aesthetically, I do think Kitakami is a step up from Paldea. I mean, graphically, it still looks like mud, but a slightly more elegant kind of mud. It seems a lot more designed than the base game's open world, and there's a few more clear landmarks. So it gets a solid B from me in terms of originality. For better or worse, the Teal Mask does feel different from the base game in a tangible way. Now, let's get to the final square on the rubric. Does the Teal Mask justify its asking price? Let's be pedantic and assume that the value of this DLC is effectively $17.50, half the asking price of the DLC on the eShop. Does the Teal Mask have a good amount of valuable content for that price? Now, I would like to establish that I do not follow the hours per dollar mindset when it comes to judging the price value of media, especially games. I've played 3-hour-long games I would pay full price for, and I played 120-hour-long games you couldn't pay me to play again. So, taking this into account, do I think the Teal Mask is a good value? I mean, yeah, I guess, if you're into that kind of thing. Yeah, for the most part, this is just more Scarlet and Violet with a really cool subquest, some interesting new and returning Pokemon, a slightly worse open world, and a substantially worse narrative and structure. Value is such an odd thing to calculate, since different things hold different value for different people. If you like Scarlet and Violet, I can't see you being too unhappy about the offerings the Teal Mask offers, but if you already don't like the game, nothing here is really gonna change your mind. So I'm gonna meet in the middle on this rating and give it a C in terms of value, but like a C with like a funny hat on it. And that's my assessment of the Teal Mask. And if you average the 3 ratings, it's like what, a C+?
You know, good effort, you still passed, but I know you're capable of a lot more. I don't think years down the line I'm really gonna be hankering for a replay of this portion of the DLC specifically. Like, oh boy, I can't wait to chase down those 3 fucks again and give a child an inferiority complex. And hey, speaking of which, released on December 14th, 2023, Part 2 of the Pokemon TM blah 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 blah, the Indigo Disk. This expansion takes place in Unova's Blueberry Academy, where you, as an exchange student, climb up the ranks of its league, as well as finally find that damn hidden treasure of Area Zero. Just a bit of a warning. A lot to talk about here, so brace yourself. Of course, we first need to go over what improvements the Indigo Disk brings to the base game. And there's a surprising amount to mention. There's an impressive 139 returning Pokemon added back into the National Dex. And this drop is special since they added a bunch of old legendaries, as well as every single starter back into the game, which was such a welcome surprise. There's even a whole post-game mechanic to get these starters to show up naturally in the open world. Nice stuff. New to the Indigo Disk is the item printer, which allows you to use TM materials to make various items. It's very similar to the Cramomatic from Sword and Shield, but I much prefer its implementation here. Not only because you get a ton of excess TM materials you wouldn't otherwise be using, it also allows you to get some pretty cool items. Most importantly, we finally have a new way of getting Terra Shards. I have no clue what took them so long to fix this, but thank God. You can even get rare Pokeballs from this machine, including extra Master Balls, which is crazy. They also added throwing styles, which are unlockable animation changes to the way your trainer throws out their Pokeballs in battle. It's small cosmetic changes like this that I wish Game Freak would do more of, so I'm glad they added it here. At the very end of the Indigo Disk, you unlock the ability for Koraidon/Miraidon to fly full on instead of just gliding. And man, this is such a nice reward. Being able to fly all around the open world freely is such a great feeling. Definitely the best in-game reward Game Freak has done. There's also a bunch of small additions. New TMs, the Catching Charm, the Mark Charm. There's a whole new Terra type, the Stellar type, which allows you to power up a move of any type while Terrestrialize, but at the cost of no unique defensive properties. Some new encounters and extra cutscenes were also added throughout the game. I especially like the one with Seda. Still no performance optimization, though I think the Terrarium runs the best out of the 3 maps, which is still not great, mind you. When it comes to improvements and optimizations to the base game, this is a major improvement from the Teal Mask. Just a bunch of cool little additions that make Scarlet and Violet better, though I can't give it a perfect rating since the performance issues are still very present. B+. Now it's time to see what sets this expansion apart from the base game. Starting with the story. You're invited to be an exchange student at Unova's Blueberry Academy, a school where I would be really excited to be on their water polo team. Mom, Dad, great news! I'm in the BBW! At least it's better than being on the cross-country team. And boy, is it good to be back in Unova. Man, Nimbasa City looks different than I remember. Hey, wait a minute. Yeah, so the majority of the Indigo Disk takes place in the Terrarium, a man-made undersea environment constructed by Blueberry Academy for educational purposes. Man, what kind of bougie-ass school is this to have billions of dollars to use on something like this? They really couldn't have just done a PowerPoint presentation? So yes, you won't be revisiting all the classic locations from Black and White, but I don't think this is a bad thing. First off, Unova is a big region, and making even a small section of it open world would probably be a big undertaking for Game Freak. So I understand why they made this decision. And 2, I think the Indigo Disk still manages to give us a ton of Gen 5 fan service, despite us not setting foot in the region proper. Characters related to old Black and White characters make an appearance. There's an entire cave that's a send up to Chargestone Cavern. Many of the tracks in the DLC directly sample Gen 5 music. There's this patch of land that's almost one-to-one the nature preserve. They put in a whole convoluted pseudo side quest to get Meloetta that people to this day haven't fully figured out. And that's just a few of the bigger examples. All across the Terrarium are little nods to Unova, so they definitely made the most out of the setting in my opinion. And from a gameplay sense, the Terrarium is one of the coolest locations Game Freak has ever cooked up. The fact that the Terrarium is man-made makes it one of the most unique explorable locations in
all of Pokemon. The clear dividers, all of these multicolored platforms spread across the region, and the skybox gives it a purposefully unnatural look that's really cool. I wouldn't call Scarlet and Violet a good looking game by any means, but this is probably the closest it's ever got to looking half decent. Turns out the game, with unfinished textures and uncanny looking landscapes, would be good at portraying a completely artificial environment. I don't know if they planned out this environment with Scarlet and Violet's technical restrictions in mind, or if it ended up being a happy accident, but it works out the same. It also carries over Kitakami's reliance on more unique landmarks, which adds a lot more character. You know, when Game Freak had the time to sneak a Lion King reference into the open world, that they had a ton of fun designing this thing. There's a ton of little optional caves and alcoves to explore, which gives the world way more depth compared to Kitakami and Paldea for that matter. I do think the terrarium is the most fun I had exploring in Scarlet and Violet. It's aesthetically the most pleasing, or as pleasing as anything in this game could be. There's a lot of diversity in the landmass, and it's got the most memorable areas and small secrets to discover. When you arrive at the terrarium, you're introduced to Lacey, one of the top students at the school, who ushers you through these early parts of the DLC and shows you around the area. And since there are in fact a few new faces here, why don't we go ahead and do a character whose design and personality I like, but don't have much to say about lightning round. Except even more lightning this time, since there's only like 5 new characters. Serrano! He's the director of Blueberry Academy, and also good friends with Clavel. He doesn't get much screen time, and I really mean it this time since he doesn't have an alter ego to worry about, but I do wish we got to see him more often in this DLC. I'll get into it later, but many of these new characters kinda get thrown to the wayside in the latter half of this DLC in favor of the larger plot. Lacey! She's the fairy-type BB League Elite Four member who is very heavily implied to be Clayton's daughter. She has some funny dialogue and was overall a welcome presence. Drayton! Another member of Blueberry's Elite Four, and he's actually the grandson of Drayden from Black and White. He's just a chill-ass dude that cheers you on over the course of the DLC, which is nice considering what character he's contrasted with, but we'll get into that in a bit. And that's it. Yeah, the other 2 Elite Four members I don't have much of anything to say about, and they're the only other new notable characters to speak of, which is kind of an overarching criticism I have about the entire S&V expansion. But whatever, let's get back to the story. It's not too long after you get yourself situated at Blueberry when you run into Carmine again, and there's something a bit off with her. She's a lot more friendly towards you, as if she didn't spend the first half of the DLC being the gaslight gatekeep girl boss poster girl, and as you talk to her more, she finally lets it out. Kieran has been acting like a completely different person after the events of the Teal Mask. Now instead of being an insufferable little shit, he's now an insufferable little shit with a bad attitude. And hair, and has gotten obsessed with getting stronger in Pokemon battling at others' expense, just to get back at you for defeating him in the battle over Ogerpon. When you first meet Drayton, he lets you know of Blueberry's take on the Pokemon League, the BB League.
Do I make an ass joke, or do I make fun of the fact that it sounds like a league for toddlers?
Much like a traditional Pokemon League, the BBL is composed of the Elite Four and a champion, with Drayton as the highest ranking Elite Four member and former champion, as he was just dethroned by Kieran. Due to a plot device, you're able to skip the usual trials a new student would have to go through, and are able to just challenge the Elite Four from the outset.
I smell a budget/time restraint.
And it's also here where I should explain Blueberry's mission structure, which is a bit odd. When you're given permission to challenge the BB League's Elite Four, the map turns into a mini version of the main game, structure-wise, with each of the 4 in their respective biomes. And you're able to challenge them in any order. But after you beat them, the game goes back to being linear, forcing you to take the critical path if you want to progress. The fact that both of the DLCs essentially handle linearity in the same way is really disappointing to me, as the open objectives in Paldea were one of the coolest things the game had going for it. And to see them regress here in the DLC is such a bummer. I don't know what happened here. Did they not know what they had with the base game? Did they take people's criticisms of the level scaling to heart and decide to not even bother giving the player choice and where to go in this open world game? I don't know, maybe I'm making too big of a deal out of this. You can still explore the open world freely outside the main story to your heart's content, and I really haven't seen other people criticize this aspect of the DLC, so I may be in the minority, but it's just so needlessly regressive. I honestly expected the DLC to be just as, if not more open-ended, so I guess my expectations just weren't in check. But now that we've entered Blueberry proper, let's tackle some of the new mechanics and features it offers. The big mechanic the Indigo Disk adds are Blueberry quests. Finally, a G-rated acronym. These are small quests you're given to accomplish out in the open world while you're exploring, each quest giving a certain amount of BP. You can spend BP on various things in the terrarium, including the aforementioned item printer and throwing styles. Individually, the quests are very simple. Catch a Pokemon, take a picture of them in a certain biome, pick items off the ground, you know, community service. They're actually quite reminiscent of Legends Arceus' Pokedex quests to me, which, considering those wanted me to pull whatever hair I had left out of my skull, and to this day make me feel conflicted things about that game, you would think I would have similar feelings about the BBQs. But I really don't. The BBQs are a lot more passive and ignorable, so it doesn't trigger my OCD as much. Though, much like Legends Arceus, they do require a lot of grinding if you want the larger rewards. Like, I'm talking hours of grinding. So it does trigger my plot PTSD in that sense. That catching sound is burned into my brain! Speaking of BP, you can also use it to invite various characters from the game to your League club room to battle and trade with. There's actually quite a bit of content here. All of the characters have unique dialogue trees, full teams for you to battle, and bespoke Pokemon with their trainer tag to collect. You can invite up to 3 at a time, and they even have unique dialogue with each other. Game Freak did not have to go as hard as they did here. This little side mode is almost its own game within itself. Though, in typical Game Freak fashion, this mechanic is real-time dependent, so your interaction with it is limited by the Earth's rotation for some stupid reason. Speaking of battles, trainer battles in the Indigo Disk are also exclusively double battles. This made for the most fun I've had creating team comps in any Pokemon game. I had a blast making strategies for these battles. There's also the Synchro Machine. Unlocked during the main story, it allows you to take control of your Pokemon at any point. Every single Pokemon in the game is compatible with it, and you can even fly with the mons that are able to. And there's no proximity limit to it, so you can go as far away from your original position as you want. I tested this with my Clodsire, and I hauled her ass all across the map with no problem. There's not a whole lot of practical use for this, but it's a super neat and fun feature regardless. However, there is one big downside. It can only be used in the terrarium. This is a really dumb restriction, and I can only speculate that it's this way because they didn't want to QA the feature in the other 2 maps, which is a bit lame. But I still think this is really cool, and I hope they expand on this feature in the future. And before we finally get back to the story, let's run through the few new Pokemon that were added. Archaludon, awesome new evolution to Duraludon, possibly a reference to a monument in Seville, as well as being a bridge. Hydrapple, the final evolution to the new Divergent Applin line. It's a cool design, but I still don't know why they released this evolution line like Netflix does with seasons of anime. Killed any desire for me to raise one myself. New Paradox Pokemon. The past Paradox Pokemon are based off the legendary trio from Johto, and the future ones are the trio from Unova. They're mostly fine, and my thoughts on Paradox Pokemon in general are still unchanged. I don't really like the look of any of the future ones, and the past ones at the very least have some cool design elements. Terapagos. Despite it being the main focus of this entire DLC, I don't really have many thoughts on this guy. It's cute, and that's all I got. Definitely a step down from Ogerpon. The most interesting thing about it is its introduction of the new Terra type. Jesus Christ, that took forever. Told you this was going to be a long one. Anyways, you go through the Elite Four and are finally able to rematch Kieran. And to be fair to him, he is a lot tougher than his last incarnation. Often cited as one of, if not the hardest battle in the game. Though, he did try to use Weather Ball on a Pokemon with Water Absorb, so it seems all that training could only get him so far. After he's defeated, he damn near has a Kira level cringe-fest meltdown in front of everybody. And you're awarded with the champion title. But before you're able to celebrate your victory, you're summoned by Briar, who tells you that she was finally given clearance to commence an expedition of Area Zero.
At some point, you gotta call CPS. This is now the second grown adult bringing children to the fucked up crater that kills you.
You see, she's after a legendary Pokemon her ancestor was researching before it was cut short and his research discredited. A Pokemon known as Terapagos, which has some connection to the whole terrestrial phenomenon in Paldea. Before you embark, the fraud Enrica entrusts you with the Indigo Disk.
Oh.
A relic that does something. I don't know, fucking figure it out. Well, it doesn't actually take you long to figure it out, since when you get to the Zero Lab, you insert the disc into a slot that was totally there before, and it allows you to take an elevator to the deepest part of Area Zero, which was also totally there the entire time.
I know people that don't use plot contrivances, and they're all cowards!
Within this deep cavern, you come across some wild Terra Pokemon with an odd 19th type you haven't seen before, the Stellar type. And you eventually make your way to the source of this unique terrestrial energy, the legendary Terapagos, in its dormant form. Kieran, being the dim bulb he is, takes it upon himself to try and take this powerful dormant monster out of its slumber by force, and almost detaches his arms from his scrawny frame in the process. But, by some stroke of dumb luck, he actually manages to pull Terapagos from its crystal. And before this thing even has a chance to take in its surroundings, Kieran panics and catches the legendary in a Master Ball because it kind of looked in your direction. You half expect him to say, "No take backsies." Briar suggests to battle Terapagos to test its power, but since Kieran is its master, of course he forgets that the terrestrial Pokemon needs to be terrestrialized to unlock its power. So he terrestrializes it, and of fucking course! We could have had a normal expedition, but no! Why don't Kieran end up being the strongest? Look what happened now! Terapagos' power goes out of control and nothing can stop it. Even when Kieran tries to call it back into its Pokeball. And the only way for you to stop it is to overpower it with the strength of all three of you. And of course you have to convince Kieran to help you, instead of looking like a deer in headlights. With the combined effort of you, Kieran, and Carmine, you're finally able to calm down Terapagos and catch it for yourself. Good job, team! I don't like any of you people. After this experience, Kieran is left with an odd sense of clarity as he apologizes to everyone for how he's been acting, and admits that he's become too obsessed with trying to be just like you. He even asks if you can start over and be friends.
Too late!
I'm sorry, we need to have a quick discussion about this kid. What exactly was the message Game Freak was trying to impart with this character? Much like other rivals, especially the ones in Scarlet and Violet, Kieran is completely obsessed with this one thing that he cannot let go of, and it affects him and the people around him in a negative way. But unlike the other rivals, I have no interest in seeing what this guy's arc is, because I don't like him at all. And in concept, I have no problem with a character like this being unlikable at the beginning and later seeing the error of their ways. But the turn happens way too sudden for it to be impactful in any way. Maybe it's a side effect of this being a story that can only be told within the runtime of this DLC, but I don't know. Kieran was given 2 whole stories to develop, and Game Freak waited until the very last second to try and redeem him. He spends the first 10% being boring, 85% being insufferable, and the last 5% he's all, "Can we be friends, please?" This has gotta be one of the weakest rivals they've ever come up with. It's like they took all the worst takes about how the rival is supposed to be unlikable actually on the internet to heart and came up with the most head-ass and insufferable character in the series' entire history. Anyway, that's pretty much the story of the Indigo Disk. Briar publishes her fucking book written with the blood of children, but I'm not really interested in going into that. Overall, when it comes to the plot of both expansions, I do think it's a pretty noticeable step down from the main game. It's not even just the central characters being off-putting, I also think it's just very unfocused. You're on a school trip, but here's the folklore of this town you're in, but now focus on these dysfunctional siblings, now you're adopting an ogre, now murder these 3 fucks, now you're an exchange student, here's all these new characters and a detailed explanation of how their school system works. Never mind, this entire thing was about helping this woman write her book about this legendary Pokemon. There's not a ton of connective tissue here to carry the story from beat to beat. It feels very random, and without the characters and heart the base game had to keep me interested, I can only shrug my shoulders at the story content of the hidden treasure of Area Zero. I think my biggest diss I can lay on it is that it's just another Pokemon story. You're better off mashing A, which is a shame. If you couldn't tell from this section of the video being the longest by pure word count, the Indigo Disk has a ton to offer on its own. It's got its own progression system, a singular open world, lots to explore, some cool bespoke mechanics. There's a lot to sink your teeth into compared to the Teal Mask. Hell, to all of the previous expansions, to be frank. But much like the other expansions, the story content is not much to write home about in my opinion. I think they almost get there with Kieran, but he's way too one note for me to take him seriously. And his arc concludes way too abruptly, which is a real bummer considering Nemona was such a step in the right direction. The Teal Mask also gets an A- for this section. And now we arrive at the final question. Does the Indigo Disk have enough value for its asking price? Since this section has gone on way too long, and I'm pretty sure you can already surmise what my answer is going to be for this question, I'm just going to cut to the chase. Yes, the Indigo Disk is a good value for the asking price. I did not regret playing through this, and I would gladly play through it again. Whatever my misgivings of the story and characters are, this is still probably the best expansion they've done to date. A for value, A- overall. And with the full expansion pass reviewed, I can confidently say that the whole thing, warts and all, was in fact worth it. Worth the switch to the DLC model, worth its asking price, worth my male pattern baldness, and was a marketed improvement over Sword and Shield's expansion.
And wow, here we are, the end of the Scarlet and Violet analysis. It has been an amazing What the fuck is this thing?
So, not long after the Indigo Disk dropped, data miners found a new mythical Pokemon and a whole event quest tied to it within the game's files, leaving many of us to speculate when and how Game Freak was going to drop this on us. And then on January 11th, 2024, distributed through a mystery gift, the epilogue of the hidden treasure of Area Zero, Mochi Mayhem, was released. This storyline takes place back in Kitakami and follows a mischievous mythical Pokemon, Pecharunt, who mind controls the population of Masui, and it's up to you and your friends to put a stop to it. Now, I'm not going to go in depth with this epilogue for two main reasons. One, it's very short and silly. It only took me about an hour to beat, and that summary I just gave covers 95% of what happens in it. And two, this video's getting way too fucking long. But what I do want to say about it is that it gives you an excuse to hang out with Nemona, Penny, and Arven for one final time. Granted, these two assholes are here as well, but it's nice to get a bit of closure on these characters, as they make zero appearances during the rest of the DLC. Mochi Mayhem is pretty frivolous, but it's got some funny moments and cool battles, and as far as mystery gift events go, it's a pretty sweet way to send Scarlet and Violet off.
And that, finally, is the last possible, conceivable thing to talk about Scarlet and Violet. I would like to personally thank everyone for watching. God damn it!
The Nintendo Switch 2. Pretty neat console. Mario Kart World sure is a Mario Kart game. The system is now my dedicated Raito remastered machine until Donkey Kong comes out. But the reason the Switch 2 pertains to this discussion is that Scarlet and Violet actually received a patch to run better on it. Now, don't get your hopes up. I'm sure it'll just make the game run at a stable 30 with a slightly better resolution. What am I looking at? Okay, so when they said that Scarlet and Violet got optimized and improved image quality and improved frame rate, they meant full 60 FPS and 4K output. I can't believe it after all this time. All the complaining, years of seeing argument after argument about the way this game runs. They just fixed it. Like that. And let's be clear, there are no caveats here. Oh, it only runs at 60 FPS in certain areas. Oh, the resolution scaling is bad. This area still chugs. No! From the testing I and many other people have done, Scarlet and Violet received a visual upgrade on all fronts across the board. Honestly, this version of the game is weird to see after playing the base Switch version for over 200 hours. It kind of made me sick to look at for the first few hours, just because I wasn't used to the game looking this smooth. It runs at a very stable 60, upscaled 4K, the draw distance is way better, there's no longer a problem with low poly or low frame rate versions of models showing up way closer than they should, so many more Pokemon show up at once with no drawbacks. I swear to God, the textures got updated. Look how shiny Miraidon is now. Scarlet and Violet went from the worst performing game in the series to the best with one update. It's now the only Pokemon game to run at 60 FPS. Technically Emerald and Gen 5's battles ran at 60 FPS. Shut up! Look at this footage! This is an open world Pokemon game running like it's on a high-end PC. Obviously, this puts this analysis in a bit of a weird spot. Now that the game runs and looks somewhat like a normal video game, does this now retroactively disqualify all past complaints about the performance? Well, in my opinion, no. Exhibit A, the invoice from my therapist. Regardless of the new version of the game, this was still the version we had to put up with for over 2 years. They had all that time to do some kind of optimization to the game, and it debatably only got worse up to before the Switch 2 update. The fucked up Switch 1 version is still more than available and is how 95% of people experience the game. So no, I don't think they're completely off the hook for now. Exhibit B, my second mortgage. Yeah, also to experience this new update, you need to have a Switch 2, which is a $450 console at the time of making this video. You need to purchase in a time where extra income is a bit scarce, let's say. This is almost the third version argument from earlier on steroids if you want to be really cynical about it. You know, Game Freak charges fans $450 to play game normally. But I'm trying to not be that guy. So let's just move on to Exhibit C. I rest my case. While the game looks immensely better on all fronts, it's still pretty ugly. The textures are still really flat, and the higher fidelity only makes the art style clash a lot more obvious. The Pokemon and humans really do look like they live in different worlds now. The Mons have all these pores and texture and stuff, and then there's the people with their flat anime faces. Some buildings and the bigger environmental objects still look very rough at a distance. So the game retains its unpolished identity despite the Switch 2 improvements. That's also not to bring up all the other non-performance problems I still have with the game, which did not get addressed with the Switch 2 update. But this is still a big boon in S&V's favor. And the fact that the update is free after you get the console is legitimately great. I could easily have seen them making this a paid Switch 2 edition. But no, you just put the cartridge in Switch 2 and boom, modern video game.
And finally, there is nothing else to talk about when it comes to Scarlet and Violet. The book is closed. But its sequel is knocking on my doorstep. I'm gonna be talking about this series until the day I die, huh?
Pokemon Legends Z-A, a title I'm still trying to decipher to this day. This is now the second Legends game, this time taking place in modern-day Lumio City, undergoing an urban redevelopment plan, aiming to bring both people and Pokemon together. Weren't people and Pokemon already together? Anyway, now, me being who I am, I definitely plan on having a larger discussion on this game later down the line, let's say. So, I'll save many of my more general thoughts on the setup for this game for that video, but as a quick summary, I find it hilarious we're effectively getting Pokemon Z all these years later. I love the Gen 2 representation in the starters. I'm really interested to see what they do with AZ in this game, and I look forward to all the new Megas. Now, I do want to focus on a few different topics that are more speculation based and have to do with its relation to the series as a whole. First off, and the most interesting to me, that setting. It has been confirmed that Legends ZA will take place entirely within Lumio City, and that is something that is simultaneously both exciting and absolutely scares the shit out of me. Now, don't get me wrong, the idea of a completely urban Pokemon game sounds like something with a ton of potential. I'm just not entirely convinced Game Freak will capitalize on that potential. The way the game works is that wild Pokemon will be relegated to areas called Wild Zones spread all across Lumiose. And at least from what we've been shown so far, all of the Wild Zones look kinda small and a bit samey. One of the biggest points in Legends Arceus' favor was the hanging threat of danger you felt when exploring out in the open areas. No matter where you went, you were wary of any potential higher level Pokemon coming and messing your day up. Having the Pokemon be relegated behind these baby gates kinda takes that feeling away. Now, it's very possible that A, the danger this world presents is not necessarily a focus of this game, and there will be other ways the game challenges the player and builds tension, especially since there seems to be a bigger focus on trainer battles this time. Or B, we just haven't been shown any of the more treacherous wild zones or special events that can happen while exploring. We don't have a full view of this game yet, and there may be an entirely different facet to this map Nintendo doesn't want to spoil us on. I really hope they pull a Tears of the Kingdom on us, and there's an entire underbelly to the city that's a ton more dangerous than what you could find on the surface. Much like how Paris in real life has an underground city. But either way, I hope the wild zones end up being way more than what we've been shown so far, which is, in my opinion, a bit of a step down from Legends Arceus. And then there's the topic of the battle system, which for the first time in the series' history has gone completely real time. Now, oh boy, do I have some thoughts on this. Many of which I'll reserve until I've actually had hands-on with the game itself, but much like the last topic, I am extremely skeptical of Game Freak's ability to pull this off. You see, from what we've been shown so far, moves are now cooldown based, and the combat focuses a lot on dodging out of the way of enemy attacks. From a glance, it looks like a mix between FF7 Remake and the Xenoblade games, and it looks okay. I definitely applaud them for trying something new, but I don't know. Does this look a little bit sluggish to anybody else? The fact that you're doing real-time commands to a character you don't have direct control over could definitely be a point of failure in the combat system. And I could see it lead to the combat feeling kind of frustrating. One thing I do find very interesting is this particular shot of stealth rocks being used. It's now an area of denial move that forces you to physically move around it. That's honestly awesome, and I hope Game Freak uses both old and new moves in more unique ways like this. Like I said earlier, there's still a lot up in the air with this game. We've only been shown very specific portions of it, so all these opinions are subject to change when the game actually comes out. It's also getting a Switch 2 version, which, like Scarlet and Violet, seems to run and look like a normal video game. So maybe Pokemon's graphical problems will now be a thing of the past. Have I mentioned that I'm delusional? And with that, I'm finally
Done with this analysis. No more Scarlet and Violet. I'm free! You know, in a lot of ways, Scarlet and Violet are my ideal Pokemon games. If I showed this game to a 7-year-old me, I would have freaked out. Mostly because some weird man was trying to talk to me.
It's got a pretty great open world, good quality of life, a ton of cool Pokemon designs, fun gameplay, and a story I legitimately cared about. On paper, Gen 9 is the game I've been screaming at Game Freak to make for over a decade now. Get away from this formula, spread out, make something wild, new, and cool while still paying tribute to tradition. This game does all that. This is, without a doubt in my mind, the biggest leap between mainline games the series has ever seen. It's night and day between Sword and Shield. I do not understand people who prop up Gen 8 as some better version of SNV. To me, this game completely erases it. I'm never going to replay Gen 8 for as long as I live because there's no reason to. It's that much of an improvement. But the cost for that innovation was deep for everything I like about Scarlet and Violet. There's 4 more imperfect things I could point to and pick apart. The unpolishedness, the terrace system, the weird level scaling, odd animations, broken animations, archaic design decisions, bad DLC pacing, unlikable/forgettable characters. This big grayed out section of the map at the top right corner Game Freak has never acknowledged, and no one knows why it's given visual real estate. Just to torture and mock us? I could go on, but in a way, I also get it from Game Freak's perspective. As someone who struggles with imperfection, a big reason why this entire analysis took so long to make, I can respect saying fuck it, let's be messy. Make the game people have been clamoring for years, even though we have limited time to make it, warts and all. No matter what I say about Scarlet and Violet, I will always prefer games like this to good, polished, but ultimately forgettable ones. Flaws are the thing that light up my brain and make me so damn interested in art. Forget just video games. Whether it be games, music, movies, anime, TV, I will always give more points for experimentation in art, even if it doesn't pan out all the way in the end. So, after all this, what's the verdict on Gen 9? What am I gonna score it out of 10? And to that, here's my answer. Who cares? There is no way I could possibly condense my thoughts on this game into one number symbolizing how much I enjoyed it. After writing over 30,000 words on it and spending day after day editing and working on these videos, how could I? But to add some closure, I will say this. I appreciate the hell out of Scarlet and Violet. It may not be my favorite in the series, most likely not even top 5, but it's definitely the entry I'm gonna think about the most from now on. This game is such a weird anomaly, even within its own series, and I don't think people give it enough credit for that. But I see you, Scarlet and Violet. I see and appreciate what you stand for. And even though you often frustrated and confused me, I had a blast along the way. Thank you.
Now that we can look back at Scarlet and Violet as a finished project, I already feel like some of its faults are starting to become a little bit more forgivable. I guess if I were to put it into a metaphor, playing, talking about, and even thinking about Scarlet and Violet can often feel like you're taking a bite out of a lemon with the rind still on. But you know what? Sometimes you gotta wade through the bad stuff to get at the good at the core. So, here's the imperfection. Oh, that fucking sucks.